An excellent Japanese Grand Prix, as it turned out, under blue skies and sunshine. Who would have thought that after the typhoon on Saturday? But that was the good news for everybody that could qualify on the clean side of the grid. Because of course, with all that rain, the dirty side was much slower than normal, and we saw that in spades as the lights went out. But let's talk about Valtteri Bottas first, because what a superb drive by him from start to finish. Absolutely faultless, really, just totally in control of that race. There were moments, of course, where you thought maybe something might happen here, maybe Lewis could do something. Absolutely not. This was Valtteri at his very best. It kind of makes you wonder, and I'm sure makes Valtteri wonder where he's been all year. He would think to himself, well, we got the upgrades on the car for Japan. It's a much better car now than I've had all year. I wish I'd had this car earlier. It'll be a different season in 2020. That's how he'll be thinking. The reality, of course, in the context of Mercedes clinching the Constructors' Championship for the 6th successive year in Japan, and locking in the Drivers' Championship now between Lewis and Valtteri only. In the context of that, Valtteri's drive is seen as the ultimate team performance, because if you perceive him as, in Toto's mind, a very, very good driver to have alongside a Lewis Hamilton. In other words, a number two, dare I say the word, this was exactly what a great number two driver is supposed to do. If the number one has an off weekend, doesn't qualify where he should, it's up to the other car to get the result. That's exactly what Valtteri did. So if you wanted any explanation as to why Valtteri Bottas was re-signed by Toto Wolff for Mercedes, it was exactly this day. Not because he's necessarily a winning driver and a great driver who can go on to take the championship to Lewis in 20 and 21. It's because he's a perfect number two to Lewis, and he did the perfect job today. A Rubens Barrichello, Felipe Massa type job. And it was great to see. Great to see Valtteri, his old self again as well. Nothing else to say about it really, other than that, good stuff. And I'm pretty sure he's going to win a few more races before the end of the year as well. Now, from the point of view of the race as a whole, this should have been a Ferrari day. No question about that. I said in the post-Friday video that Ferrari were going to be a lot nearer, I felt, on Sunday than the results on Friday showed. I put my emphasis on Charles Leclerc because he looked so good through the S's, which is such a critical part of the lap. And if you can get the S's right, it kind of sets up the Suzuka lap for you. But I did make the point that Charles was losing in Sector 2, particularly in the hairpin. I don't think he was doing at the hairpin what maybe you have to do, what a Lewis does to get that to really work for you. And I don't think that happened for him on Sunday morning. For whatever reason, I don't think it happened for him. And I think that's where he was losing out to Sebastian. Yeah, Sebastian was a tad quicker on his final Q3 lap up through the S's, but it wasn't enough to give him the pole. Charles had to drop away somewhere else, and he did in the second and third sectors. So that was a little bit of a surprise, but all credit to Sebastian Vettel for getting that pole. That was a reminder of how quick he was when the Red Bull was really, really good with a lot of downforce at the rear, how quick he was around Suzuka. He was able to just plant that car. And yeah, he for sure wasn't braking going into turn 1A, braking hard into 1B, but just beautiful to watch. Everything very linear. He could do his V corners really well with that new set of tyres, new set of soft tyres. And so the pole went to him. And that was more than just a normal pole, because it meant he was on the clean side of the grid and Charles was on the dirty side. So if you look at, you saw Valtteri Bottas's face after qualifying when he was third, but he was on the clean side of the grid. You could see the smile on his face, knew that he indicated that he knew that he had a real shot here of doing something on 3 or 4 hours later when the race was going to start. So it was defined to some extent, the race, by who was on the clean side of the grid. Not that it's impossible to overtake at Suzuka, but it is, because of the number of corners, because of the way the lap is, it is relatively easy or straightforward to pull out a gap if you've got track position. And you can lose quite a lot of time passing a slower car. As we saw with, for example, Alex Albon, who didn't make a great start, got too much wheel spin and had to spend quite a lot of laps getting past the McLarens. Drove beautifully, I've got to say, here as an aside, Alex Albon, beautiful to watch. And my main thing is the S's. And when I say the S's, what I'm really talking about is the top of the S's when they come out of the right-hander and then they go into the left-hander before Dunlop. It's that change of direction from the right to the left. That is where you can see drivers with real sensitivity and touch. And Alex there was fingertip beautiful to watch, I thought. You can see a Grosjean or a Sainz leaning on the left rear to get the car to go around to the left. It's asking more of the car and it's asking more of the tyres for sure. But Albon quickly got above that, even though he's a rookie around Suzuka. And what a job he did to qualify right up there with Max, virtually the same lap time as well, on what was a difficult qualifying session. So Alex Albon, full marks to you. Brilliant drive, I thought. Anyway, getting back to the race structure, of course, it was then Sebastian Vettel's Japanese Grand Prix. What went wrong? Well, it looks as if he just went a little bit too quickly in terms of clutch release, realized that he was in trouble, braked, got away with it in terms of the transponders and the stewards later reviewing it all because it was inside the margin of error. And he didn't, of course, get any advantage. In fact, he got a big disadvantage because of the whole thing. But what a mistake for him to have made on the grid at Suzuka. Got to say it's downhill there. Maybe that played a part in it. Did Ferrari take that into account? Sebastian's been to Suzuka so many times, he should know that problem. It's unlikely there was any issue with the downhill element of the start. But that was Sebastian Vettel's Japanese Grand Prix gone in that millisecond before the lights went out. And that is a great, great pain for Ferrari to bear. Of course, Charles was asking a lot of Charles to make a great start from the dirty side of the grid, and he didn't. He made a really slow start, which is why the Maxes and, of course, the Valtteris were way ahead. And so you couldn't rely on Charles going into that first phase of the race because of where he was on the grid. It was all on Sebastian's shoulders. Yes, he kind of made up for it with a really good second-place drive, good defence from Lewis, to the point where Lewis's tyres at the end went off, his soft tyres. But, you know, this was a race that Ferrari should have won. They had the quicker car. They certainly had the pace on the straight. Maybe they didn't have the same tyre deg profile as Mercedes because Mercedes were better around the corners. They had more grip. But that wasn't enough to have lost them the Grand Prix. And Ferrari, again, will be saying this is a race we should have won this year. And it's, Sebastian Vettel. Seb, you did a very good job most of the weekend. You got the pole. But when it really mattered under pressure at the start, that's where it went. So frustrating for Ferrari fans, and indeed, of course, for the Ferrari team. As for Lewis Hamilton, on the dirty side of the grid, he was always going to be in trouble off the line, and so it proved. He did a good job to back away, give a little bit of room to the Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc incident. That was a classic example of Lewis reading the two drivers in front of him and having a feel for the tension between the two of them, giving them space, not getting involved. And that is what we've seen from Lewis right back to the GP2 days, when he had a sort of, in his brain, he knew the style of every other driver around him on the grid. Even when he was going to lap them, he knew roughly what the driver was going to do. And it's exactly the same talent now. It's not talent, it's just hard work that Lewis had there to read that situation, to stay out of trouble. He did actually make contact with Carlos Sainz. You see a little bit of debris flying off the front of the Mercedes as they touched going into what they call turn 3. I call the first corner of the S's, which of course might have played some role in the performance of the car. But then the real damage was done when Ferrari didn't bring Charles in and the front wing end plate came off the car in front of Lewis, took off the mirror. You know, that was ridiculously dangerous in my view, and he got a 10-second penalty in the end. Ferrari got a 10-second penalty in the end for not bringing Charles in with all that stuff and the sparks. I think that's a pretty lenient penalty actually for what happened there, because we're talking bits on the car. There's so many bits on the car now that can do damage, and for Lewis to be tucked in behind that Ferrari and then stuff to come off it was just not on. And I'm surprised that it sets a bad precedent actually. They only got a 10-second penalty, because something like that happens, he should be brought straight in. The team should have done that, to my mind, because there's no way in the world he was going to be able to get through to the first stint. I think they'd made the decision to bring him in, and the stewards had said, bring him in now, and they said, yeah, we'll bring him in the next lap. All that was going on. But at the end of the day, the stewards shouldn't have to tell the team to do that. They should just bring him in straight away. In my mind, there's no question there. Safety, and also, of course, performance for the race as well. So Lewis then had no mirror on the car. Not sure, interestingly, how much aerodynamic effect that had. He had that little incident with Sainz when he lost debris as well. So the car for sure wasn't A1 from Lewis's point of view. And then he just had to play a race of catch-up. For me, Lewis lost this Grand Prix by obviously not out-qualifying Valtteri. If he'd been on the clean side of the grid, he might have got the lead into the start, as Valtteri did, and he might have won this Grand Prix. So it all went wrong for Lewis in qualifying. How it went wrong was the Lewis that I described that we were seeing on Friday. This was a rather harsh Lewis, and I predicted on Friday that he would soften all that out and it'll all come together for him on Sunday, and I imagined that a very dirty track with wind and stuff in qualifying, that Lewis would be the guy that would make the most of all those variables. But as it turned out, he didn't, and that harshness that was a characteristic of his driving this weekend persisted. And he was beaten by Valtteri in qualifying, which would have been really, really tough for him to live with. And then in the race, of course, being on the dirty side of the grid and then those incidents, all he was ever going to do is finish second or third if Valtteri made a good start, or if Vettel made an even better start, which of course he should have done. So from Lewis's point of view, a very unsatisfactory weekend, and he won't have enjoyed it at all in the way he normally does at Suzuka, because it's a great circuit. Why his driving was like that is a question that for sure Lewis will be thinking about even as I speak, and he's in his plane flying to wherever he's flying, because he's very self-critical, and he'll probably be thinking, I kind of took Japan for granted. I kind of thought I would get there and I would just love the feel of the country and the circuit and everything would come together. But it just shows that even at the level at which Lewis is operating, he has constantly, like all racing drivers, to tell himself just to slow down a little bit, keep the softness in his driving. And he lost it, I think, in just harsher inputs than we would normally see from a Lewis Hamilton. And up through the S's, you could see it in that bit I was describing when he come out of the right, going into the left. You could see that he was leaning on the car more than he did last year, for example. Maybe he will say in his mind, that was the new setup of the car and I don't like it as much. I doubt it. I think Lewis is very self-critical, and if one driver can do what Valtteri did, Lewis will be thinking, I should have done that plus a little bit more. So it'll be interesting to see how he fights back. Of course, Mexico is a circuit where Ferrari are going to be brilliant. They're going to be so quick on the straights there that Mercedes are already thinking P3, P4. But from Lewis's point of view, of course, there is the championship to win, to clinch alongside Valtteri. And what he doesn't want is for Valtteri again to be substantially quicker. When I say substantially, I mean chronically over a weekend, as distinct from just in terms of the gap. We talked about Alex Albon, another good drive by Carlos Sainz. Wow, this guy's really getting into a groove, isn't he, in terms of how he qualifies and then putting a race together. He's really improved a lot in that sense. He's loving that McLaren environment. And with the Mercedes engine deal coming in 2021, he'll be thinking, this is just brilliant. It's when I'm going to be peaking as a driver, and I can work towards that. So a really good drive by Carlos Sainz. And Lando Norris, I thought, looked very good too. Not quite debut, because he did run in an FP1, I think, in 2018, but a really good drive by Lando until he had problems as well in traffic and all sorts of other stuff. But both McLaren drivers did an excellent job. And the team itself, under the control of Andreas Seidl, the team principal, is looking really good now. So another strong weekend for McLaren. And wasn't it good to see Daniel Ricciardo driving a Daniel Ricciardo type race again, passing people, putting him in wherever he was at the back of the grid somewhere and charging through the field and doing some great overtakes, just flicking the wheel here and there. That's the Daniel that we haven't been seeing all year, partly because of the situation in which he's found himself, partly because he took himself out of Red Bull and put himself in a Renault. So it's it's been a frustrating time. But for Daniel fans out there, which of course include the likes of me, it was great to see him in traffic doing what he does really well. And let's hope we have more of that. The shame is that he's doing it all for whatever it was, 5th, 6th, 4th, 7th place. It should be for one of the top 3, as we well know. But for Renault to go from where they are to where they should be, still a huge, huge ask. And for Daniel, it's a question of motivation and not looking too much at his bank account and remembering that he's doing it mainly for the money. He's got to be thinking, I've got a chance. And this race was a fun weekend for him. And hopefully that will have rekindled some of his enthusiasm for driving. Nico Hülkenberg looked good too, I thought, all weekend, as did Pierre Gasly. Loves Suzuka. He was really good there in Super Formula, of course, before he got the Red Bull Formula One opportunity, and he looked good. He looked very good. He won't be enjoying how well Alex Albon is going in the A team, of course, but he's doing a good job, I think, now of putting that out of his peripheral vision and just focusing on what he has to do. And he looked good. He was, I think he did everything he could be expected of doing in the Toro Rosso Honda. But if there were 2 drives which consolidated the Formula One careers of both Alex Albon and Pierre Gasly, I think we saw them at Suzuka. If there was any doubt about who was going to be Max's teammate in 2020 or where Pierre will be, of course that was expelled at Suzuka. Alex Albon will be in the A team, Pierre Gasly will be doing a great job for Toro Rosso as well. Final word, and I wish it wasn't the final word always, has to go for George Russell. He had another difficult day. The Williams looked terrible. Didn't seem to have any brakes. They seemed to be all over the place. But George just maximising that car yet again. I would love to see him in a really competitive Grand Prix car. He's really talented. He's right. He's part of the Lando Norris new era, isn't he? But it's difficult when it's in this situation. But all this stuff, it sounds like a platitude, but all this stuff he's going through now will pay off in abundance when he is in a quick car, because when he does have to play the big points well, it'll seem relatively easy to him, a bit like Nigel Mansell in his career, although Nigel had to go through a lot more of it, had to go through like 4 or 5 years of Formula One in an uncompetitive car, but when he got the real chance, it was just so easy for him. It just happened like a knife through butter, and I think it'll be the same for George. Another good drive by George Russell. Anyway, moving on to Mexico, high altitude, long straights, Ferrari City, Arizona, well, Mexico anyway. It's going to be a big day for them, but who will it be? Sebastian Vettel or Charles Leclerc? That is the question, a big race coming up for them.